Hi there, hope you're all well, and a very warm welcome back to At the Movies with Andrew, the show where I, Andrew, tell you all about what I saw and what I thought of what I saw at the cinema. And presumably, at least some of you are back here for the second half of my concluding rundown of what I saw in 2018 after my worst of the year list. So we've had the rest, now let's try the best. Okay, I tried. Out of 60 movies I saw at the cinema in total last year, this is the selected rundown of my best. And to quickly talk about 2018 in general, I suppose I noticed a lot more movies centered around women and black people and ethnic minorities in relation to developments in social media and culture and what have you. But as a cinema goer, I noticed more and more of what I observed back in 2017, that a lot of people are flocking more towards streaming services and their laptops and quick fix on the go entertainment, and thus less and less people making more of an effort to go to the cinema for their entertainment. And maybe it's because I go to a lot of afternoon showings, but definitely the times that I went and noticed that I was the one of about 6 or 7 people in every screening was pretty more palpable this year, as Netflix grows more and more and people like me raise our fists and cry out, "You're killing the cinema industry." But to counter that, cinema chains, at least in the UK, to their credit, have tried to find ways to counter this with pushing more and more their loyalty cards or unlimited screening memberships or matinees for older people or babysitters or mothers with babies or people with dogs. I'm not kidding you, I did actually see that one time. And more as I went to cinemas, multiplexes that were about to close in a couple of weeks' time, I noticed a rise, to counter that, of independent art housey boutique chains of cinemas popping up to sort of justify, yes, we are charging you premium prices to see movies, but you'll have luxury recliner seats and you'll have cocktails and you'll have stone-baked pizzas delivered to you. So think about that. So in that respect, the cinema experience has changed in some ways for the better, but I have noticed a change. But after that waffle, let's get down to what will be my top 10 best movies of 2018. Yes, in contrast to the top 5 worst movies, where sometimes, because I don't go and see every terrible movie and thus have to sometimes stretch my imagination a bit to what can fit on there and what I found the most disappointing, perhaps, rather than the worst sometimes, and stretched it out. With the best, as I'm sure many people do, best of list, I had the exact reverse problem. That I could make this a top 20 list. I saw so many movies and had so many good experiences that I really have to narrow down what touched me on a intellectual level or even an emotional level of all the cinematic releases that I saw this year, which was tough, but somehow I managed it. So the following will be, without wanting to make this video too long and waffly, a free form rattling off of all the greatest cinema experiences I had this year. So let's get right into it. Right. Starting off my honourable mentions in chronological order, roughly, we have Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. I think it's fair to say that everybody expected this to be terrible when it was first announced. I mean, a sequel or a follow-up to the 1995-ish family favourite Jumanji, released 20 years later without the late great Robin Williams, with people like Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart and Jack Black doing their broad comedy shtick. And now it's not a board game, it's being sucked into a video game plot that we've seen so many times before. And it's going up directly against the new Star Wars movie. Yeah, everybody, including myself, expected this to crash and burn. But amazingly, it didn't. In fact, it lasted for quite a number of weeks. And critically, it even outperformed Star Wars The Last Jedi. And I think a lot of this is down to the engaging chemistry that our lead heroes had with each other, both pre being sucked into the game, the teenagers, and our actual avatars, like I said, Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart, and they really rattled off well against each other with the jokes and the camaraderie. There was a genuine sense of a team, and even Jack Black managed to do well portraying a vacuous high school cheerleader stuck in a fat middle-aged man's body. But also, being inside a video game, things went at a very decent pace. And yes, it used the video game tropes like extra lives and the challenges, but it also used this, I think, as to make a commentary about video game tropes and video game conventions like unskippable cutscenes and non-playable characters being robotic and repeating the same single lines over and over and over again. And also another thing people complained about before the movie came out is that Karen Gillan was in impractical clothing. But they make a note of this in the movie, that this was a deliberate choice, that Karen Gillan is this Lara Croft stereotype, and she complains about wearing impractical short shorts in the jungle. So this movie was a lot cleverer than people gave it credit for. But on top of that, it was very brisk and very hit all the right emotional notes about being a team and friendship, and were learning to work together. Even Nick Jonas of the Jonas Brothers did better than I expected him to in his significant role. So yeah, definitely the first entertaining movie that I saw in the year. On the subject of entertainment, we have Coco. Yep, another year, another Pixar movie. And I tell myself I'm not going to fall for the same old trap of they're going to be bright, they're going to be colourful, it's going to seem like innocent entertainment, that then they'll find a way to use their GPS tracker directly to your heartstrings and use the sad music and the deep emotional themes. And I'm not falling for that. I've seen it so many times before, and yet I fell for it once again. Yeah, very colourful, very respectful and detailed about Mexican culture, especially with regards to the afterlife, and definitely a strong theme of following your dreams, following your heart versus your responsibility to your family. And neither side is necessarily in the wrong, so I commend it for that. Probably helps that I didn't have that obnoxiously long and notorious Olaf's Frozen Christmas short that I've heard so much about. But yeah, this definitely did its job. Next up, we have I, Tonya. I could just use the review quote that was in all the trailers about how this was the Goodfellas of ice skating, and perhaps leave it at that, because that is pretty much a good summarization. Because as far as biopics go, this was definitely acidic and caustic and very relentless in its portrayal of a anti-hero, so to speak, or not so much the price of fame, but the price of notoriety and surrounding yourself with equally unpleasant and selfish and stupid people. Of course, Margot Robbie as the titular Tonya did well in her role, but I think special credit, which the Oscars themselves recognised, was Alison Janney as a sharp-tongued and unhelpful and unpleasant and sadistic mother. Yeah, as you will perhaps see later on this list, this was definitely the year of foul-mouthed, caustic, acid-tongued older women. Next up, we have an interesting case, Annihilation. This was a thought-provoking, slowly paced, deep, thoughtful, eerie, and haunting, proper, hardcore piece of sci-fi horror. So, of course, everybody in America ignored it and went to go and see Black Panther for the 57th time. And in the UK, that meant Paramount shunted it straight to the Netflix streaming service. But fortunately, it got a very few, precious few limited one-night-only cinema screenings, one of which was at my local cinema. So I was very privileged to go and see it with a small group of like-minded people. Yeah, if you think of premise of the Predator and put in emotionally damaged lady scientist, then you've got the general gist of what this movie is about and what it's going for. Not so much with the action, but certainly trying to answer what the heck is going on in this forest and coming up with a lot of I don't knows in the dialogue. But yeah, the visuals were trippy, the soundtrack was equally haunting, and there are a couple of things in here like the climactic lighthouse confrontation, and especially the skull-faced bear creature that repeats the dying screams of its last victim that are pure, proper, effective nightmare fuel that once you've seen them, you can't unsee them. Help me! That's the bear, so yeah, see it for yourself. On the subject of horror, we have A Quiet Place. Yeah, definitely Emily Blunt and John Krasinski and Millicent Simmons and that boy whose name I can't remember, sorry, did very well in establishing themselves as a convincing us as a family, resourceful family adapting to this terrible situation of having to remain quiet or the monsters will come and kill you. And on that subject, I think the greatest impact that this horror had on me was outside the film itself, in the cinema that I was watching it in. And I can't be the only one here because, like I say, this played on very primal, perhaps playground game fears of don't make a single noise or the monsters will come and eat you. And this had a very profound effect on the audience, some of which I imagine are used to chatting away and being disruptive, but this time you had to sit and just stare and watch it. So yeah, not only did you have this tranquil sense of I'm just watching this, there's no sound, it's a mostly dialogue-free movie, just absorbing the visuals. And if an audience member coughs or whispers or goes, "Oh no, don't step on that," or looks at their phone, then you would be guaranteed to have a accusatory glare from the other members. So it had a very effective, disquieting and absorbing experience. Next up, one of the general rules I set for myself is that as much as I like to be a cinephile and moan about how superhero movies have taken over all the box office cheddar and all the audience reception, whenever I ask people about, you know, do you want to go to this movie with me, their eyes immediately light up when you mention a superhero movie. I mean, that's pretty much the cinema in general these days. I like to moan about that, but I can't ignore the fact that these are mostly good. We're living in a golden age of comic book superhero movies that at least try to be faithful to the source material and are generally good modern popcorn entertainment, with one or two exceptions. Venom. Sorry. So I could very easily fill up the list with superhero movies, so I have to be firm and decide which superhero movie I like the most to put in the numbered list. And if I have to add another one, then put it in the honourable mentions. And so with that in mind, here's the movie that made everyone in the world instinctively hesitant or afraid to snap their fingers ever again. Yep, I am of course talking about Avengers Infinity War. I could talk about how this felt like a suitably epic and tragic culmination of 10 years worth of build-up. I could talk about how the directors, the Russo brothers, brought together all these different characters from all these different worlds and backgrounds, and it did not feel unwieldy or stodgy in any way. Everybody had a part to play. I could talk about how Thanos still managed to be a sympathetic and pitiable, tragic character even after he wiped out half of all life in existence. But instead, I'll just say, Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good. I don't know what's happening. And you will immediately understand how this had a raw emotional impact on me and anybody who saw that. I mean, talk about a cliffhanger ending to rival The Empire Strikes Back, say, and at least The Empire Strikes Back had a sense of hope to it. And on the subject of superhero movies, and coming back to Pixar again, we have The Incredibles 2, the movie that we all waited 14 years for. Was it worth the wait? Well, it's on here, so you could say that. It might not be the exact sequel that we were perhaps hoping for, but it still managed to be brisk and frenetic and entertaining. Screenslaver as a villain wasn't quite as memorable as Syndrome, and I think it's pretty much an accepted cliche in Disney animated movies now that if a background character is being supportive and inconsequential, then they're going to turn out to be the surprise villain at the end. But apart from that, all the action sequences with Elastigirl were dynamic and very creative and made very good use of her stretchy powers. Mr. Incredible, to his absolute credit, when faced with being a stay-at-home dad, did not fall into the cliche, mopey, whiny, depressed, I don't want a family, this is too hard. No, he made an example of himself. Yes, he got tired and worn out and frustrated, but he was trying, god damn it. He was trying to succeed in helping the children, which in this current age of toxic masculinity and negative stereotypes in the media counts for an awful lot, let me tell you. And of course the kids, especially I think Jack with his mutating powers was a constant comic delight, especially with the raccoon fight. And Edna Mode, do I even need to say anything about Edna Mode? So yeah, after this, do we need an Incredibles 3? Not as much as we needed this. And now, arguably my biggest why didn't this do much better at the box office this year, unappreciated hidden gem entry, is Bad Times at the El Royale, which managed to be classic Tarantino, even though it wasn't Tarantino, it was Drew Goddard, in the best way, emulated his style in the best way. And I don't necessarily mean the violence, although that was certainly in there. I mean stuff like his early works like Reservoir Dogs, when in an almost theatrical sense you have a limited group of characters in a confined space and let's see what happens to them, particularly and let's skip around in time a bit with different title cards and see how the action over one night unfolds from their different perspectives. Yes, a lot of characters here with the script making very clever and cunning use of their characters and their motivations and their shady past and guilty secrets that gradually unfolded across the movie to great deliberate effect. And this was complemented by the performances, including particularly Cynthia Evero, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Jeff Bridges. So yeah, all round a very good case of noir done effectively. And finally on the honourable list, Suspiria. When we heard that a remake of this Dario Argento 1979 classic was going to be made again, I think we all reacted in the way that anybody would say, I'm going to remake Casablanca. It's one of those classics, those moments in time, those perfect masterpieces that you simply do not meddle with. So everybody was very contentious about that. And when it came out, it did turn out to be a very philosophical and deep love it or hate it kind of horror movie. But I'd say that worked greatly in its favour. People may argue about the slow, deliberate, glacial, unsettling pace over 6 acts and 2.5 hours. People may argue about the themes of matriarchy and female power and terrorism and stagnant hierarchical systems. People may remember and recoil at the occasional moments of visceral bone-snapping horror that did come around, and the Carrie, especially the Carrie-esque bloodbath at the end. People may argue about the performances by Dakota Johnson and Tilda Swinton, and especially wonder why the latter had to be disguised as an old man throughout some of the movie. But nobody was arguing after it came out that this movie was unnecessary. Right, getting into my top 10 now, and starting at 10, we have Isle of Dogs. So let me get this up. Despite what you might think from this, I've never been much of a dog lover or a pet person in general. As a child, I felt that dogs were smelly, they pooed and peed everywhere and required too much high maintenance for my tastes. But maybe it's a combination of getting sentimental in my old age, seeing movies like this that make me appreciate more that man's loyalty and companionship with dogs and vice versa, which this film was all about, if you didn't tell from the title, which sounds like I Love Dogs. And given that this is a Wes Anderson movie, I'm inclined to believe that this was deliberate. Yep, this was a Wes Anderson movie, with Wes Anderson being at his usual Wes Anderson-ry, with dry humour, witty, pedantic dialogue, and meticulously framed shots and compositions, and of course all the supporting actors like Bill Murray and Jeff Goldblum and Edward Norton putting in their usual sterling work. And furthermore, this was a stop motion animation, which made Wes Anderson's obvious attention to craft and detail all the more evident here. And yeah, he made a film about dogs being condemned in Japan as having flu and being sent to an island of trash, and essentially becoming a commentary on displaced migrants, and made it oddly beautiful and engaging. So yeah. under different circumstances, I'd say that a well-crafted piece of animation like this movie would be higher up on my list. But as you'll see, there were one or two other examples of animation that just did it slightly better for me. But I still appreciate the care and detail and the wit and the warmth that Isle of Dogs had. At number 9, we have Black Klansman, or as the spelling on the title would have you believe, Black Klansman. The latest movie from Spike Lee, and arguably his most accessible and entertaining movie that he's done in years. I mean, I liked the experimentation and the style that Chirac went for when it came out, but the less said about the Old Boy remake, the better. And yeah, Spike Lee does continue in this movie to not be the most subtle of directors when it comes to commentary and message. He takes the true story of a black police officer who managed to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan with the help of his reluctant white partner and somehow turn it into a protest about President Trump and the Charlottesville incident. I mean, complete with dialogue like, "Oh, don't worry, nobody will ever elect someone like the leader of the Ku Klux Klan as president in America," and as well as downright dedicating the last 5 minutes to Charlottesville footage and Trump's reaction of there were good people on both sides. So bit in your face, but apart from that, I would say that there is still much to enjoy here as a buddy cop movie with the chemistry between John David Washington and Adam Driver. With the situation of infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan, they play off both the comedy, the inherent absurdity of the situation with John David Washington's character Ron Stallwood putting on his best white man voice on the phone saying, "I sure do hate those black people," and listening to the other person on the end's horrible casual bigotry and trying to stifle a laugh, as well as the tension that would come in this situation when they're at the meetings and, "Oh no, you've made a slip up, is this the moment that they're going to get caught?" He really captured the tension and the excitement of that situation. But apart also I'm sure Spike Lee won't forgive me for saying this, but it felt very Tarantino-esque in it being a visual and aesthetic riff on 70s blaxploitation movies, complete with the afro hair, the clothing and the soundtrack, and even I think the stock footage reflected the period, and as well as that, Ron Stallwood and his girlfriend have a full-blown conversation complete with poster images of blaxploitation movies at the time, having a very Tarantino-esque conversation of, do you think this movie is racist, or do you think Black Dynamite is a good role model? So as a film studies person who did a degree, I certainly appreciated that. And also, on the subject of film studies, the scene where Harry Belafonte, of all people, talks to the Black Panther movement about how a friend of his got mobbed and killed after his local town saw Birth of a Nation, and intercutting that with the Ku Klux Klan sitting in a basement watching D.W. Griffith's notorious classic and hollering and hooting out loud about watching this movie. "Ha ha ha, look at the pickaninnies, ha ha." That scene is I guarantee you that is going to be used in film studies lectures and seminars from here on in. So yeah, Black Klansman, great work from Spike Lee. On the subject of filmmakers making very polemical and potentially politically charged movies, at number 8 I've put Peterloo, the latest work from Mike Leigh, who's renowned for taking actors and giving them character briefs and workshopping them and improvising them to an infinitesimal degree, so that the end result that you see on screen feels really complex and well thought and brought to life. And I definitely got a lot of that in this, even though it was a historical drama in 18th century Manchester. So you have very compelling, very down-to-earth performances from the actors involved, including Maxine Peake, complemented by the director's own meticulously framed and impressive shots of the 19th century Manchester. You can practically feel and smell the smoke coming from the factories, the cobbled streets and the laundry sheets and the dirty linening and that. So it was very immersive in both those respects. Yes, it was 2.5 hours long, and a good portion of that was public speakers in taverns going, "This has to be done for the people. We have to fight the injustice." And the surrounding crowds go, "Yes, yes, well said, lad." A lot of that, but I think the length and the different perspectives of all the different parties involved made this a very effective powder keg, so to speak. You felt throughout most of this movie, the simmering resentment, the sense of injustice, and the terrible sense of entitlement and fear and anger that this was all building up to something bad. And when it did come, it did make the titular climactic massacre all the more visceral and chaotic and terrible, in contrast to the slow build-up before. I took my mum to see this on her birthday, and she did thoroughly enjoy it, skull-crushing massacre and all. So that was the deal breaker for me for putting it on this list. On the subject of movies that I took my mum to go see, at number 7 I have The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Since she's a Coen Brothers fan, I took her on a wet and cold afternoon all the way up on the train to one of the precious few cinemas that was showing this limited release, 1 week only screening of a Netflix exclusive movie. I'm not sure she's entirely forgiven me for doing that to her yet, but I'd say it was worth it, because this was an anthology movie of Western tales, and the risk with anthology movies is that you do risk segments being better than the other segments, and certainly some of these stories felt more like bite-sized jokes compared to others, including the titular Buster Scruggs, this jolly buck-toothed singing rootin' tootin' cowboy that you might expect from a 30s Western movie, comically juxtaposed against more realistic, bearded, rotten-toothed, foul-mouthed individuals. And you saw that, and you found yourself wishing that you had more screen time with him and these people. But overall, I'd say the quality was consistent throughout. The mordant humour, the fascination with death that the Coen brothers are known for was all there. There was a definite running theme of how death is random and life is cheap in the Old West. Ha ha ha. The cinematography, the landscapes and the wide shots of the Old West and the rugged mountains and the countryside was lush and excellent throughout. At number 6, we have a latecomer here, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. As I've talked before about on my review for this movie, I have followed the Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man comic, so I did go into this already with a emotional investment in this movie, and I do have to say that this summed up the Miles Morales origin and the Miles Morales character, all the essential basics, in a very compelling and engaging way for a new audience. But more than that, it had this hyper stylistic and innovative animation style to it throughout that was literally a comic book on the screen. It had a very compelling and entertaining supporting characters, like a fat hobo depressed older Peter Parker. It had Spider-Gwen. It had anime Spider-Girl. Nicolas Cage as Spider-Noir. It had a talking Looney Tunes-esque cartoon Spider-Pig. And above all that, Miles Morales remains the central focus, the centre of attention, our figure of identification throughout the whole movie. So yeah, this, like I said, this was the best Spider-Man movie of since 2004's Spider-Man 2. This was a wonderful evocation, not just of Miles Morales as a character, what makes him tick, but Spider-Man's place in popular culture. And now at number 5, and now we've reached the top tier of my list. You know, we're reaching the good stuff. We're reaching the movies that really hit me to the core in a good way. And we have one of those little known movies that I saw that not many of you may have even been aware existed. Wonderstruck. No, not the movie about the boy with the disfigured face wearing the spaceman helmet and he gets bullied at school. No, that's Wonderstruck. Yeah, I thought so. Considering the talent involved in this movie, it's got actors like Julianne Moore. It was written by Brian Selznick, the guy that wrote Hugo. It's directed by the guy that's done a lot of movies, including Carol and Far From Heaven, Todd Haynes. I expected this, when I first heard about this movie on the horizon, to get a lot more attention and a lot more venues they'd actually got. But as it turned out, it came out and only came out in 5 cinemas across the entire country. Why do I get the feeling that's going to be a recurring phrase or joke in my series? Before going straight to Amazon Video, I believe, the very following week. Fortunately, one of those cinemas was like 10 minutes walking distance from my workplace, so I was able to go and catch this little hidden gem, and boy, am I glad that I did. To sum up the premise very quickly, Millicent Simmons, the girl from A Quiet Place, plays a girl who was born deaf, like in the ears, and she runs away from home, runs to New York City in order to find her lost, missing mother she doesn't see. Meanwhile, the boy, Oaks Fegley, the boy from that recent Pete's Dragon remake that everybody's already forgotten about, plays a boy in the 1970s who becomes deaf, and he runs away from home to go to New York City in order to find the father that he never knew. Both of these children are connected by fate. How were these two children brought together? What's the connection between them? If you see the 2 time periods and you're able to put 2 and 2 together, then you are able to make an educated guess as to what the final twist in the story is. But I'd say on this occasion that the journey getting there is worth the destination. Firstly, in terms of the visual style, and like I said, there are two time periods, and Todd Haynes conveys this primarily by making 20s girls story play out like a silent black and white movie. It helps that she's deaf, so you've got this jazzy piano-ish classical soundtrack playing in the background, and you've got all the angry adults like the father and the police reacting to her in that exaggerated physical way that you see in silent black and white 20s movies, like yeah, like that. And meanwhile, with a 70s boy, there's more dialogue, obviously. But as soon as he enters New York City through the subway, you get 1970s New York. You get the shades of yellow and beige and brown and dirt. You get the uh, figures in the background with their afro hair and their clothes. You get the funky disco soundtrack. You get the poor black children playing around a fire hydrant. So a very aesthetically pleasing movie overall. But more than that, this was quite charming and quite sedately paced as a children's movie. It's definitely about the sense of discovery and the clues and the journey through places like especially the New York Museum of Natural History, I want to say. And in that respect, if you can remember when you first went to a museum as a child, you may have got lost from your parents, so you found yourself walking these echoing hallways. You might have been lost, you might have been scared, but you do remember the sense of, well, wonder, for a lack of a better word, looking at all these exhibits of stuffed animals and these paintings, and they're getting a proper sense of history. So yeah, this is the cinematic equivalent of getting lost in a museum, and I do mean that in a good way. So yes, essentially a children's story, but this is definitely a film for I'd say 10 to 12-year-olds who spend all their time in the library, bookworms, any little boy or girl with a thirst for knowledge. And as someone with that kind of childhood, this did resonate very deeply with me. On the subject of, yeah, sorry, I am doing that a lot, aren't I? I do apologise. On the subject of children's stories, or at least stories about children, at number 4 we have The Breadwinner, the latest animation from Cartoon Saloon, who brought us The Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. And now we have something that is distinctly not Irish. Oh no, this is set in Taliban-occupied Afghanistan, and it's about a family that gets brought into further ruin when the father gets arrested and taken away. And since the rest of the family is made up of 2 or 3 women and 1 infant son, then they're pretty much screwed in terms of being able to go out in public, let alone being able to make ends meet. So our lead character decides to go out and search out what happened to her father and where he's imprisoned, and defy all odds to go there and secure his release, but at the same time cut her hair and pretend to be a boy, pretend to be some distant relative. And whilst doing this, she relates this picture book fairy tale story to her other friend, who's a girl pretending to be a boy, as well as her family, about the boy who went to slay a monster. And we eventually find out how this is relevant or thematic to the whole story. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend that this is a entirely comfortable watch. It doesn't pull its punches in terms of the Taliban's treatment of women. At one point, an angry officer berates and beats the mother, and we don't see the connecting blows, but we certainly see the stick coming down. But despite that, I'd say that this is a very effective, a very haunting and hopeful story about overcoming the odds and overcoming hardship and prejudice that really got to me, particularly with its relentless, grim but determined climax and the final speech, the last words of dialogue throughout the movie. Really brought home what this movie is about. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Coming in at number 3 now, and I swear I did not do this deliberately, 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri. Yeah, I have talked about this with Matt before on the channel, so do go and search for that. But I'll say again that, yeah, I definitely see why this was effectively the runner-up at the last year's Oscars, particularly from Frances McDormand as the bitter, angry mother of a raped and murdered daughter, who then is motivated. She's then motivated to put the billboards up in protest at the lack of development from the police. So she conveys this hard edge, but is also deserving of our sympathy. You had Sam Rockwell as the dumb as a brick, dumb racist cop who goes through an arc and becomes controversially becomes sympathetic himself. So there are potentially racist or unsympathetic or just miserable and angry people who undergo change in this movie, and the script and the performances did a very good job of conveying that, as well as conveying this just this story about small-minded attitudes of a small-town village, of the nature of revenge and hatred and anger and the effects that have on people. And it doesn't necessarily provide easy resolution or answers to those themes, which I found frustrating at first, but I can, thinking back on it, I do appreciate that's the attitude that they went for. And now, taking up the runner-up spot, the number 2 spot, having just had the runner-up to last year's Oscars, now we have the winner of last year's Oscars here, The Shape of Water, the latest visual masterpiece from Guillermo del Toro. And on that note, whilst I wouldn't call this movie Pan's Labyrinth level of absolute perfection, I would say that it's pretty damn close. Sally Hawkins plays a mute woman, a caretaker, a cleaner, who is not only drawn to the plight of a fishman monster that her department has just captured, but ends up being romantically attracted to him, even sexually attracted to him. And despite all that, this is a very haunting and engaging and arresting fairy tale on a Beauty and the Beast level. And even saying that, I wouldn't necessarily call either character Beauty or Beast. I would call them more outsiders, and there is a definite running theme of the outsiders and the marginalised coming together to help each other, like the gay neighbour, the black co-worker, helping their mute friend against the Michael Shannon's brutish, sinister director, who has his own arc of damaged masculinity going through the movie, what with his car getting crushed and his poor fingers being chopped off. There are definite visual and thematic riffs running throughout this film, complete with a very distinctive mise-en-scène and colour palette of greens and sickly yellows and leaky pipes and rainfall and grungy, dirty areas. So yeah, definitely one of the most technically accomplished movies and most engaging stories this year. Okay, people, we're here. We're at the top of the mountain. And what did I put up there? Um, Another one of my general rules here, and one that, like last time on the worst of list, that I had to break for the list this year. Um, because of my workplace in London, and the easy distance travel for me, therefore, I do try whenever I can to go to the London Film Festival every October and see. And what I see there, I do make a deliberate rule to not include on my numbered list because technically they're not cinema going mainstream experiences. But this movie right here was the most technically flawless and the most visually poetic movie experience that I had this year, that I simply could not justify not putting it at the top of the list. And so here we go. At number one, hey Roma. Ooh, Roma. Yep, Alfonso Cuarón's latest movie went straight to Netflix, and all the majority of the reviews that I've seen for this movie have a lot of people berating and bemoaning the fact that they could not see this on a big screen. To which I can smugly sit back and say, I saw this in a tent, a very big tent, next to Embankment Underground Station, with about 1,000 other people on this large cinema screen. And yeah, as a Netflix exclusive with mise en scène, it's very detailed mise en scène. It does bear repeat viewing, so you can find all the details in the background that you missed the first time around. As a very languid and sedate and mostly calm movie with that atmosphere, you can justify having it on your laptop or TV while you're cooking or doing your taxes. Sure, I can totally see that. But I do say find the biggest screen, even if it's like a home screen you can find, and sit back and marvel at the majesty of what's going on here. Because like I say, so this is set in 1970s Mexico, and it's based on the director's childhood. So there's a very intimate, passionate sense of what's being put up on the screen. You've got the house with all the bookcases, the dirty piles of clothing, and all the beds, and all the kitchen equipment. You've got the streets with all the vendors and the cars and the bicycles. You've even got forests and small grubby towns with people walking in the background, and a human cannonball, and fires and people putting out the fires. There's so much detail here. Yes, this is mostly a movie of panning, of tracking shots of all these locations, but what tracking shots, what detail, what care, what direction. Also, the performances, we have, let me see if I get this right, sorry, Yalitza Aparicio, hope I'm saying that correct, as our lead character, this cleaner who looks after this upper middle class family. I've heard that this actress is a primary school teacher who had never done any acting before in her life, and if that's the case, I have to say well done. Maybe it gave a more grounded, real sense of warmth, perhaps, of spontaneous, improvised warmth in this housemaid. And Marina del Tavira also puts in a great job in the supporting role of the mother, having to go through the specific troubles that this family is going through. I'll just say it's to do with the husband and leave it at that. Yeah, with it being shot in black and white, with its languid, sedate pace, this slice of life premise, this had a very French New Wave sense of filmmaking, which, as that was one of my favourite subjects on my film studies degree, really did it for me. It really touched me on a emotional level, particularly with the occasional visceral moment, including the hospital and the beach. Really, with the framing and the composition and the acting involved, I felt really invested in this world. Even though there were like 1,000 people around me, I felt like I alone was drawn into this world of laundry, of street vendors, of carnival, of New Year's celebrations, of watching this family go through these experiences and tribulations throughout this year. A very deeply immersive and effective piece of masterpiece filmmaking, and that's why it's #1 for me. Oh, right. I've got 2018 out of my system now. Hope I didn't bore any of you too much. What were your favourite top 10 movies of 2018? Do, if you feel so inclined, leave your thoughts in the comments section below. We're moving into 2019 now, and like every other recent year, I'm sure it'll be a year of cinema and movies that starts out, we all think there's nothing interesting on at the cinema, this isn't going to be good. But after 12 months, we'll all look back and go, there were some good and bad memories, and I look forward to sharing 2019 with you. And since January is Oscar bait season here in the UK, I'm sure there'll be a lot of treats coming up that I hope to share with you. In the meantime, do continue to like and subscribe and watch both this series and the other plethora of content we have on Matt's Movies, Music and More. Hope to see you next time when we begin 2019. In the meantime, do take care of yourselves and each other. Peace out.